Jenna Park had been a night shift nurse for 3 years and had learned exactly 2 things about survival: stay small and stay invisible. She was good at both. Then a little girl was nearly killed in the examination room at the end of the hall, and Jenna stopped being either one forever. She didn't plan what happened next. She didn't calculate the risk or weigh her options. She simply looked up from her chart at the wrong moment, saw what no one else in that room had noticed, and moved. 3 days later, she woke up in a bedroom that didn't belong to any world she had ever lived in. The sheets were the color of heavy cream. A fireplace burned low across the room, filling the air with cedar and something faintly floral she couldn't name. Through the floor-to-ceiling window, a gray Connecticut coastline pressed against a winter sky, and the ocean beyond it was the color of old pewter. Her left wrist felt wrong. She lifted it. Where her cheap rubber nursing watch used to be, a bracelet sat closed against her skin, platinum hinged. On the inside face, engraved in letters too deliberate to be decorative, Kastner. Jenna stared at it for a long time. She had heard that name before. Everyone in the city had. She had grown up in Flushing, Queens, in a 2-bedroom apartment above a laundromat that her mother had kept spotlessly clean until she couldn't anymore. Her younger sister Bex was 21 now, finishing her 2nd year of pre-med at NYU on a partial scholarship and 3 different grants that Jenna had helped her apply for. The remainder of the tuition and the dorm fees and the textbooks and the nights Bex called crying because she couldn't keep up, those were Jenna's to carry. Which was how she had ended up at the Callaway Pediatric Clinic on 64th Street, working the midnight to 8 shift 3 nights a week on top of her regular ER rotation. The Callaway was private. It paid well. It asked no questions about who the patients were or why their bodyguards never left the waiting room. On the night everything changed, Jenna had been 11 hours into a double shift. The waiting room held 2 men who wore their suits, the way armored doors wore their hinges. Functional, immovable, not entirely meant for civilian spaces. A little girl had come in through the service entrance at 12:43, carried by a man with close-cropped silver hair and eyes that looked like they had personally witnessed the invention of cold. The girl was 8 years old and unconscious. She had been running a fever that spiked so fast it had scared the bodyguards more than they wanted to admit. Her name, according to the man who carried her, was Sasha. She was wearing a nightgown printed with tiny yellow stars. Jenna had gotten her stable by 2 in the morning. Sasha's fever broke at 2:40. By 3:15, Jenna was at the nurse's station updating the chart when she noticed the orderly. He was new. She didn't know his face. That wasn't unusual, the Callaway rotated staff. But he was moving with a particular kind of efficiency that Jenna recognized, not from nursing, but from 3 months of trauma rotations at a county hospital where things went wrong fast and wrong people occasionally walked through the wrong doors. He was moving like someone with a destination, not a task. He turned into Sasha's room. Jenna set down the chart and followed. She pushed open the door in time to see him uncapping a syringe at the bedside. Not the angle of someone administering medication. The angle of someone delivering a point-blank dose to an IV line without checking the chart, without logging it, without any of the dozen small rituals that nurses performed so automatically they had become involuntary. Stop. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. He turned. His eyes went flat in a way that had nothing to do with surprise. Jenna understood in the span of a single heartbeat what she was looking at. She understood, too, that the child in the bed behind him was not going to be alive in 30 more seconds if she waited for someone else to act. She grabbed his wrist with both hands and twisted. The syringe went into her own forearm. There was a second, maybe 2, of pure burning clarity, where everything in the room was very sharp and very bright. She heard the door slam open behind her. She heard shouting. She heard the hard crack of something connecting with something else. Then the ceiling tilted, and she stopped hearing anything at all. The man who came to stand at the foot of her bed the next morning was the same man who had carried Sasha through the service entrance. Up close, he was harder to look at than he had seemed in the soft panic of a pediatric clinic. He was tall, with dark hair threaded silver at the temples and a jaw that seemed to have been cut rather than grown. He wore a charcoal suit with no tie, the top button of his shirt undone. The look on his face was not relief, it was not gratitude. It was the careful, controlled expression of a man who had spent decades making sure no one could read him. "You're awake," he said. "Where am I?" Jenna asked. Her throat felt like dry gravel. "My home, outside Greenwich." "Your name?" "Nikolai Kastner." She already knew it. The bracelet on her wrist confirmed what the name alone would have told her. The Kastner Group, private security contracting, international logistics, and a dozen other polite terms for an empire that operated where governments preferred not to look. Headquartered in Zurich, residences in 3 countries, the subject of 2 Senate hearings that had produced nothing but careful non-answers and more questions. "You put this on me," she said, lifting her wrist. He didn't look away. "Yes." "You don't have the right." "I know." He moved to the window and stood with his back to her, looking at the coastline. When he turned, there was something different in his face. Not softness exactly, a fracture in the control. The man you stopped was a professional. He was contracted by a competitor who has been trying to reach my daughter for 6 months. When my security team removed him from that room, there were cameras, witnesses. A nurse in a clinic that operates under complete discretion suddenly became extremely visible. Jenna was quiet. "If your name surfaces in connection with what happened, you'll be used to get to Sasha, or you'll be killed to send a message. My world doesn't have a middle option." He crossed his arms. "There is, however, one category of person that my competitors are cautious about targeting directly." She looked at the bracelet. "Family," she said. "My legal team handled the documentation while you were unconscious. I'm aware that doesn't constitute consent. I'm also aware that without it, you would be dead before you reached Queens." He held her gaze. "I'm telling you the truth about your situation, Miss Park. What you do with it is your choice. And if I leave, then you leave, and you take your chances." She thought about Bex, about the apartment above the laundromat, about the way her mother had looked in her last weeks, scared of something she couldn't name and too proud to say it. She thought about a little girl in a yellow star nightgown, unconscious in a clinic bed, with a man standing over her who did not belong there. "You owe me the real explanation. All of it." Nikolai Kastner looked at her for a long moment. Then he pulled a chair to the side of the bed and sat down. It was the first time she had seen him sit. The knock at the bedroom door came an hour after he left. Soft, tentative, the knock of someone who had been told it was all right to come in but wasn't entirely sure they believed it. Jenna said, "Come in." The door opened 2 inches, then 4. A small face appeared around the edge. Dark eyes, olive skin, a braid someone had started and not quite finished. Sasha Kastner was clutching a stuffed rabbit so old its ears had gone flat. She was wearing jeans and a red sweater, and she was looking at Jenna with an expression that was trying very hard to be brave. Margot, the housekeeper, had told Jenna that Sasha hadn't spoken an unprompted word to a stranger in 2 years, not since her mother died. Jenna didn't try to fill the silence. She moved over a few inches on the bed to make room, and she waited. Sasha crossed the room in small, careful steps. She stopped at the bedside. She looked at the bandage on Jenna's forearm where the syringe had gone in. Then she looked at Jenna's face. She held out the rabbit. Jenna took it with both hands, like it was something important. "Thank you," she said quietly. "What's his name?" Sasha didn't answer, but she climbed up onto the edge of the bed and sat there with her small legs dangling, pressed close enough that Jenna could feel the warmth of her. They stayed like that for a while. Outside, the winter ocean moved. Nikolai was standing in the doorway when Jenna finally looked up. She hadn't heard him come back. He was watching his daughter sit next to a stranger on a strange bed, and for one unguarded moment, his face looked like something that had been carrying a very heavy thing for a very long time. The dinner was Nikolai's test, or rather, it was his associate's test. Jenna understood that the moment she walked into the dining room on his arm and felt the quality of the silence that followed. 8 men at the table. Some looked like senior partners at a law firm. Others looked like exactly what they were. People who made decisions in rooms that didn't appear on any organizational chart. They assessed her with the polite, surgical precision of people who had learned that politeness was just threat evaluation with better manners. Nikolai introduced her as his wife. A few men nodded. One of them, younger than the others, sharp-featured, with the expression of someone who had already decided something, leaned forward halfway through the main course. His name was Wendell. "Forgive me," he said, eyes moving to Jenna's hands. "A clinic nurse, overnight shifts. I'm curious, what exactly drew Nikolai to you? The professional discretion or the reflexes?" The table went still. Jenna set down her fork with a small, deliberate click. "Both," she said. She looked at him evenly. "Though I'd argue they're the same quality. You learn to notice what doesn't belong in a room, and then you do something about it. It's a useful skill." She paused. "In any profession." Wendell's smile tightened. Nikolai's hand found hers under the table, his thumb pressed once, lightly, against her knuckles. That was the end of the conversation, but it wasn't the end of Wendell. The winter benefit was held at the Hartley Museum, 3 weeks after the dinner that had felt like a trial. Neutral ground, technically, the kind of event where the city's visible power and its invisible power moved through the same rooms and pretended they had nothing in common. Jenna wore a deep burgundy gown with long sleeves. She had refused the diamond earrings Margot set out and worn, instead the small gold studs Bex had given her for Christmas 2 years ago. Something she was not willing to trade for a role. Nikolai noticed. He didn't say anything, which meant more than saying something would have. The ballroom held the particular energy of people performing their own version of themselves. Jenna moved through it with Nikolai's hand at the small of her back, heat bleeding through the velvet, and tried to look like a woman who belonged in rooms like this. "Stop scanning the exits," Nikolai said near her ear. "You told me to be alert." "Alert, not anxious." "There's a man by the East Bar who's been watching you for 11 minutes, Jenna said. "He's wearing a catering jacket, 2 sizes too large, and he hasn't served a single drink." Nikolai's hand stilled against her back. "Don't look," she said. He didn't. He kept his eyes on the silver-haired official he was speaking with, and his voice continued moving through the conversation without a single crack. "Where is he now?" he said under his breath. "Moving toward the corridor that leads to the smoking room, where you're supposed to be in 4 minutes." Nikolai finished the conversation with smooth professional efficiency, collected a glass of champagne from a passing tray, and said nothing else. "We need a diversion," Jenna said. "Something that stops the room and buys your security team time to intercept him." "What kind?" Jenna looked at the tall floral installation on the column to her left. Glass vases and white lilies stacked into something that looked expensive and deeply, structurally optimistic. "The kind," she said, "that a clumsy guest might cause by accident." She turned. She walked to the installation. She made contact with it at the precise angle she had calculated in the half-second she had to calculate anything. The crash was extraordinary, glass and water and lilies and the particular sound of something expensive destroyed publicly. The music stopped. Every head in the room turned. In the doorway to the corridor, 3 members of Nikolai's security team moved at once. The man in the too large jacket reached under his arm and found people already in his space before he could clear it. He went down fast and quiet, and the band restarted, and the benefit continued as though the worst thing that had happened was a floral arrangement. Nikolai was at her side in 40 seconds. "That was the original Murano collection," he said. "It was also in the way," Jenna said. He looked at her with something she hadn't seen on his face before. Not gratitude, not exactly. Something quieter and more complicated. It lasted until Aldous arrived. Aldous Fenwick had been Nikolai's head of security for 22 years. He had the kind of face that inspired institutional trust. Steady eyes, deliberate speech, the bearing of a man who had filed difficult things neatly away. He had been at Sasha's mother's funeral. He had carried Sasha on his shoulders at her 5th birthday. He appeared at Nikolai's shoulder now with the information that federal agents were moving on the building. 2 minutes. Service entrance. They moved. They were in the kitchen before the front doors burst open, and they were in the alley behind the museum when Jenna realized the car that was supposed to be there was not there. Aldous was not there either. The van that came around the corner had its headlights off. They moved before the side door finished opening. Nikolai pulled Jenna behind a concrete pillar and returned fire into the dark. They ran. They got through a loading dock and a parking structure that Nikolai seemed to know from memory, and they came out 8 blocks north into the January air, and Jenna's borrowed heels were finished, and she didn't care at all. The safe house was a 1-bedroom apartment above a pharmacy in Midtown that smelled of old paper and wood smoke. Nikolai stood at the window for the first 10 minutes and said nothing, and Jenna understood he was recalculating everything he had believed about a man he had trusted for over 2 decades. She found a medical kit in the bathroom cabinet and sat on the edge of the bed and cleaned the cut on her palm from the glass. When Nikolai came and crouched in front of her without a word and took over the task with hands that were controlled and careful and not entirely steady, she let him. "Sasha is at the estate," she said. "I know. Aldous controls the security rotation." The silence that followed had a different weight than the ones before it. "There's one person whose access he can't override," Nikolai said after a moment. "My brother, Ivan. We haven't spoken in 3 years. He has reasons to dislike me." He paused. "He also has reasons to hate anyone who moves against Sasha." "Then we go to Ivan," Jenna said. "He may not open the door. Then we knock until he does." Ivan Kastner operated out of a converted warehouse near the waterfront. And he answered the door himself, which meant he already knew they were coming, and the fact that he'd let them reach it was either trust or a very particular kind of trap. He looked like Nikolai the way rough stone looks like polished marble. Same material, less finished by intention. He had a scar that ran jaw to collarbone, and his eyes inventoried Jenna in 3 seconds and filed her under something complicated. "Who is she?" Not a question. "My wife," Nikolai said. "No, she isn't." Ivan looked at Jenna, "But she's the one from the Callaway." "Aldous has Sasha," Jenna said. "He's either already opened the estate to whoever contracted the original hit, or he's about to. We need to move now." Ivan studied her for another beat, then he looked at his brother. "I always thought Aldous was the one thing you got right," he said. "So did I," Nikolai said. Ivan turned back into the warehouse and raised his voice. "Get the vehicles." They came at the estate from 3 sides before dawn. Ivan's people were not subtle. They weren't meant to be. They went through the side gate with enough noise to pull every hostile body in the building toward the perimeter. And while that was happening, Nikolai and Jenna went through the kitchen garden entrance that Nikolai had memorized at age 9. The house was wrong. Jenna felt it the moment they stepped inside. The quality of the silence, the absence of staff, the 3 men in tactical gear she didn't recognize lying still in the main corridor. Nikolai moved through the house with controlled speed, and Jenna stayed close, and the medical bag from the safe house hung over her shoulder on instinct. Old habit, the kind 3 years of emergency nursing builds into your hands without consulting your brain. Inside it was a syringe, preloaded, a fast sedative she had prepped in the safe house bathroom, enough to take down a large man in under 90 seconds if she could get close enough. Sasha's room was on the 2nd floor. Aldous was already there. He stood against the far wall with his arm across Sasha's chest and a weapon in his right hand. Sasha was awake. She was very still, the way a child is still when someone old and trusted has become something frightening, and she hasn't finished understanding it yet. She was holding the flat-eared rabbit against her chest with both hands. "Put it down," Aldous said. His voice was exhausted, not afraid. Just exhausted, the way of someone who made a decision a long time ago and was very tired of carrying it. "Both of you." Aldous, Nikolai didn't raise his weapon. He didn't lower it. "Look at me." "I am looking at you. I've been looking at you for 22 years. Aldous's grip on Sasha tightened. "You know what I see, a man who inherited everything and protected nothing. Your father understood that a structure requires sacrifice. You wanted to run an empire like it was a board meeting. So you went to the Morel Group. I made a partnership with people who understand how this works. Let her go." Weapons on the floor first. Jenna was in the doorway. Aldous was fixed on Nikolai. That total narrowing of focus that happens when someone has been waiting a long time for a specific confrontation. He had not tracked her properly. She was behind him and to the right, and his attention had collapsed down to the man in front of him. She looked at Sasha. Sasha looked back at her. The child's eyes were exhausted and frightened and 8 years old, and underneath all of that they were watching, still watching. The same quality of attention Jenna had noticed the first night in that clinic room. A child who processed everything and said nothing. Jenna held up one finger. Very slowly, she touched the side of her own neck. Sasha's eyes didn't move from hers. Jenna mouthed, "Get low." 1 second. Sasha went limp. Not a fall, a folding, the deliberate boneless collapse of a child who has decided to be entirely unhelpful, and Aldous's grip slipped 3 inches, and his weapon hand dropped to compensate for the shifting weight, and in that 3 inches and that half second, Jenna crossed the room. She got the needle into his neck before he could bring the gun back up. He got hold of her wrist. He was strong. She felt it, the kind of strength that didn't announce itself, and she held on with both hands and kept the plunger down and did not let go. He dragged her sideways. She braced against the wall. Sasha scrambled across the floor toward the doorway. Then Nikolai was there. Aldous went down. The room went quiet. Sasha was pressed against the doorframe, the rabbit against her chest, watching her father lower a man who had once carried her on his shoulders to the floor of her bedroom. Jenna crouched in front of her and checked her face and her arms and said nothing, just looked, the way some nurses look, thorough and quick and without any of the panic that would have been honest but wasn't useful. Sasha looked back at her. Then, in a voice small and rough from disuse, she said, "Jenna." Not Miss Park, not the lady, not anything formal or distanced, just her name said the way a child says the name of someone they have decided to keep. Jenna felt something happen in her chest that she didn't have a clinical term for. She wrapped her arms around Sasha and held on, and Sasha let her, pressing her face into Jenna's shoulder and holding the flat-eared rabbit between them. Behind them, Nikolai made a sound that was not quite a breath and not quite a word. The sound of a man who has been holding something at a distance for 2 years and has just lost the ability to keep doing it. He crossed the room and put his arms around both of them. And the three of them stayed there on the floor of a room that smelled of old wood and a child's shampoo, while the sounds of Ivan's people finishing their work outside rose and eventually went quiet. 6 months later, the Kastner estate in Greenwich looked different in spring. The security structure was different too. Ivan had rebuilt it personally loudly, with an extended editorial commentary about his brother's previous choices that Nikolai listened to, with an expression of careful restraint that Jenna was fairly sure meant he agreed with most of it. Ivan had also, apparently, decided that living in the guest house was preferable to the warehouse, and no one had successfully argued him out of it yet. Sasha was on the lawn, coaching one of the security team through the rules of a card game she had invented, which appeared to involve a great deal of creative interpretation on her part and a great deal of patient nodding on his. She had been talking for 6 months, steadily more, the way a river refills after a long dry season. Cautiously at first, then with growing confidence. She talked at breakfast. She talked in the car. She talked most of all to Jenna, with the easy authority of a child who has decided that someone is permanently safe and adjusted her behavior accordingly. Bex had visited twice. She had looked around the estate with the expression of someone doing rapid arithmetic, and then told Jenna, privately, that she was going to need significantly more information. Jenna had told her to sit down. The terms of the arrangement expire in 2 months, Nikolai said. He had come up behind her quietly, which she had mostly stopped startling at. Technically, Jenna agreed. You're not obligated to stay. She looked at him. He was watching Sasha on the lawn, and the late afternoon light was doing something specific to his profile. And Jenna had spent enough time studying the architecture of his face to know the difference between his controlled expressions and the ones that slipped through when he forgot to hold them in place. This was the second kind. What if I wanted to renegotiate, she said. He looked at her then. Renegotiate to what? Something without an expiration clause. She held his gaze. Something permanent. He was quiet for a moment. Below them, Sasha laughed at something the bodyguard did, a full, uncomplicated sound that rolled across the grass and scattered the birds from the hedge. Nikolai reached out and took Jenna's hand. His thumb moved over the platinum bracelet on her wrist, the one she had stopped trying to argue about somewhere around month 2, the one that had become, without her entirely deciding it, something she had simply kept. You walked into a room full of strangers to protect my daughter, he said. You had no reason to. She was scared, Jenna said simply. So was I. He said it the way people say things that cost something, for a very long time. She turned her hand over and laced her fingers through his. On the lawn, Sasha looked up and found them standing there, and waved with the unself-conscious authority of a child who knows exactly where home is. Jenna waved back. She had walked into a pediatric clinic on a Tuesday night in January, with $11 in her checking account and a double shift ahead of her, and somewhere in the dark and the noise and the breaking glass, she had stumbled into something she hadn't known she was missing. She wasn't the invisible girl from Flushing anymore. She was Jenna Park Kastner, and she had decided, with full information this time and nobody holding a gun, to stay.